Life is Strange Double Exposure had a huge task ahead of it, with Max Caulfield, the original protagonist from the first Life is Strange, making a comeback which in hindsight seemed impossible based on the final choice of the first game. It felt like a bombshell when the game was announced back in June. With a lot of different opinions about what direction Double Exposure was going to take the series in, I tried to remain optimistic about the game and give Deck 9 a chance, despite the questionable marketing of the entire project telling me that this could be a grave mistake. I pre-ordered the Ultimate Edition, which granted you 2 weeks early access to the first 2 chapters. I played them, took down notes, and actually made a video discussing my thoughts. I tried not to be too negative nor positive due to the fact that I didn't want to come to a conclusion over a game that none of us had fully played yet at the time. In this video, I won't be talking massively about those 2 chapters. More predominantly, I'll be discussing the chapters thereafter to avoid sounding too much like a broken record. This video is essentially a continuation of the last review I did. I recommend watching that video before watching this one, as my opinions have changed a lot since then. So here is a card at the top right of the screen that will take you to that video, or a link in the description. I, like many others, have been really excited for this game. I did enjoy the first 2 chapters despite being on the fence about certain moments and some parts of the narrative, so naturally after the plot twist at the end of chapter 2, I was really looking forward to playing the rest of the game. I went through quite a lot of emotions, and I certainly wasn't the only one. This video is going to be split into 3 parts: the positives, the negatives, and finally extra additional points that I'll discuss at the end. And of course, it goes without saying that there are going to be major spoilers of pretty much every single Life is Strange game, including Double Exposure, in this video, so you have been warned. So, was Double Exposure a worthy sequel to the original Life is Strange? I feel like it's easier for me to discuss the positives first before I dive into the negatives. Despite its issues, there are still a lot of things to love about Double Exposure. Of course, the selling point of Double Exposure, having Max Caulfield back as our main protagonist. I know I spoke about her a lot and her return in my first impressions review, but spending those last 3 chapters getting to play as her again was an absolute pleasure. I loved this grown-up, confident and sassy Max. I was initially concerned about how Deck 9 were going to write her character, considering this is a character that already has a pre-existing formula, so their task was to write her story from Life is Strange 1 to Double Exposure in a way that doesn't contradict what has already been briefly touched on in Life is Strange 2. But she's still Max, and thankfully they haven't ruined her. As we know, a lot of time has passed since what happened in Arcadia Bay, regardless of whether you chose Bay or Bay, so there were definitely a lot of obstacles there and room for error. But I'm happy to confirm that Deck 9 nailed the whole character development stuff, and that was a relief. I had so much fun playing as her again and watching her interact with the world and other characters. Plus, Hannah Telle coming back to voice Max just felt like it was written in the stars. You can tell she's slightly altered Max's verbal mannerisms to match the more mature character approach, but she still maintains a lot of quirks from the original game that made her so iconic. She did an outstanding job. There were definitely a lot of emotional scenes in this game, and Hannah really hit the mark with showing off her dynamic range with voice acting. Some scenes worth noting is the chase scene in chapter 3, when Max finally catches up to her doppelganger and they have a confrontation. It's amazing to hear Hannah switch the tone of her voice to a more sinister manner, unlike the soft-natured Max we know. Another scene where the voice acting was brilliant was at the beginning of chapter 4. Both Hannah Telle and Olivia Abiasi, Sophie's voice actor, deliver a really emotional, powerful performance, delving into their past and origins of their power and the consequences. To be honest with you, Hannah's reprisal as Max really carried the entire game for me. At the time of me writing this video, Hannah's performance in Double Exposure has earned her a nomination for an award of Best Performance by the Game Awards for her performance in Double Exposure, and honestly, I really hope she wins this. Now, to make this easier for myself and everyone, I want to state that in my canon playthrough of the first Life is Strange, I sacrificed Arcadia Bay, and I wanted to reflect that decision in Double Exposure, so I'll be talking about the game in that context from now on to avoid any confusion. Max is clearly still battling with trauma after the events of the first game. It is definitely a massive weight to carry with you, being the reason that an entire town perished and having to be the person to make that horrible choice in the first place. Watching Max still bear with this trauma, as we haven't really seen much of it at all since the end of the first Life is Strange, was gripping. Having her react to old memories, talk about it with other characters, and even read her old journal entries was really bittersweet, and it was interesting to witness her be really raw about this event. Not just what happened with Arcadia Bay, but her breakup with Chloe too, which I'll talk about later. This version of Max is definitely a lot deeper. On the exterior, she's this warm, artistic, smart woman with a lot of hope and promise, but there is a side she doesn't show to her peers earlier on in the game, as mentioned a lot by Sparxxyy in bits of dialogue, being surprised when Max reveals even a tidbit of information about her past. On the inside, there is a lot of unresolved trauma, anxiety, shame, and loneliness. So being able to explore this side of Max too whilst interacting with the environment to learn this information was a detail that I really appreciated. I'm glad to say that Double Exposure follows suit by having a great soundtrack like the other games too. Since playing the game, I have nearly non-stop been streaming the songs to Spotify. There are also lo-fi remixes of the soundtrack under the name Lo-Fi is Strange, which is the kind of marketing, as an avid lo-fi listener myself, I'm always happy to see and get behind. These are available on both YouTube and Spotify if you want to check them out. They're amazing. The main composer of the soundtrack is Tessa Rose Jackson. During marketing, she was really enthusiastic about the project. I think the songs she wrote and composed for the soundtrack really suit the entire vibe of the game. The soundtrack also features a lot of artists who aren't as mainstream or are independent, and I think this is great because it definitely gives these underappreciated talents the exposure and platform that they deserve. This is a common trend for the Life is Strange soundtrack. I've discovered a few artists from this series. A few to mention are Angus and Julia Stone, Daughter, and local natives mainly. Not only is the soundtrack great, but the score is too. Whether it be a piece of music composed for a certain scene or moment, or a song from the soundtrack, but a soft instrumental version, these tracks really complement the ambience and give scenes more of that memorable emotional impact. My personal favourite song from the soundtrack is Under My Skin by New Dad. It plays near the beginning of Chapter 3 when Max is waiting for Moses at the Overlook, and combined with the scene and the themes along with it as well, the entire scene is just perfect thanks to that song, and it is one of my favourite moments from the entire game, hands down. It just gave me that classic, nostalgic Life is Strange feeling for some reason, and was a faithful reminder of how much I love this series. Along with the soundtrack, the visuals are there to complement it too. The character models are really well polished, along with their facial expressions as well, which gave them that bit more character. They really paid attention to detail with facial features, skin texture, and textures of clothes. The environments are absolutely stunning, and I again had a lot of moments where I just paused what I was doing to take in the beauty of what is around me. They have reintroduced moments of calm, which is a staple feature in Life is Strange games, to just take a moment to pause from whatever may be happening at that certain point in the story, and to take a step aside for a second to take in what is actually happening. It's usually complemented with a little bit of dialogue and some music. These moments are also key for the developers to show off the time they put into the environments and attention to detail. I loved being able to find areas where you could reflect in my playthrough. It's just another feature that creates so much interest and helps me personally feel more immersed. I stand by the statement I made in my review of chapters 1 and 2, and that is that Double Exposure is the best looking game in the entire franchise thus far. I actually really enjoyed the use of Max's power in Double Exposure. I was quite skeptical about the power at first, and I was worried about it being a bit too gimmicky considering how much this new power was pushed onto us during the marketing with the whole 2 timelines, 1 mystery tagline. But it grew on me, especially shifting. It was tedious at times running back and forth to get to a shift point, but I quickly got over it and really appreciated the change in environment and clear differences between the 2 timelines. For example, everything is bright and merry in the Alive timeline, with everyone having different things happening in their life here. Everyone is getting ready for holidays and the area is decorated. But in the Dead timeline, everything is dark and low-spirited. Due to Sparxxyy's murder, everyone and everything is sad. The vibes are different, the music that plays is different, there are no holiday or seasonal decorations. The difference is like night and day. I really loved exploring the 2 different timelines, especially when you need to complete a task by hopping into another timeline, then hopping back again. It can get confusing at times, keeping track of which version of which character you're talking to, and the game does allow room for that error to happen, which is a realistic possibility and happened to me a few times in my own playthrough. But there was an odd charm to that confusion, it doesn't feel unintentional, and encourages the player to pay better attention. Now, it's time for me to move on to the negatives of this game, and unfortunately, there is a lot for me to say here, and I'm going to try my best to be as tactful as possible about this, because the stuff I'm about to speak about aside, Double Exposure is fine. I wouldn't say it's Deck 9's finest work, but there was so much missed potential here, and it's a massive shame. I think it's always important as fans to highlight the negatives in a franchise you love. I personally found it hard to have a negative opinion of this game, and not because it was hard to pick out negatives, because trust me, there is a lot to cover and pick here, but because I love Life is Strange, and to see this entry in the franchise not be received well by fans hurts. But it hurts even more to agree with the constructive criticisms about it, and it's not quite lived up to my own expectations either. When you care about it, you want it to succeed. Unfortunately, in Double Exposure's case, the highs are overshadowed by the lows. The story is easily the biggest negative for me. It starts out pretty simple. Sparxxyy is murdered mysteriously. Max discovers she has a power to hop to an alternate timeline where Sparxxyy is alive, and she utilizes this to try and get to the bottom of the mystery and find out who is responsible. The first 2 chapters explore that narrative a lot, and it's not too difficult to follow. But after chapter 3, it turns into this muddled mess. There are so many things that happen or take place in the game that simply just aren't explained. Let's address a few of these plot holes. In chapter 1, before Sparxxyy is murdered and Max is walking to, I assume, Hellerton to call it a night, we take a photo, black out, get a feeling to check on Sparxxyy, hear a gunshot, see that Sparxxyy is alive, go to the Overlook to speak to her and check on her, then she's dead via gunshot wound, and this weird occurrence is never mentioned again. Sparxxyy seemed serious on the phone call she received a few moments prior, so it's understandable that Max wanted to check that Sparxxyy was okay, but this entire series of events are just so weird. Why did we hear one gunshot but see Sparxxyy alive and well a few moments prior? Why is it once we get to the Overlook that Sparxxy's now dead, despite being seen alive and very well soon before? Why is this never explained or mentioned again? The collectibles are Polaroids taken by Max, but from another timeline that is never explained or further explored. I liked the collectible Polaroids, but it felt like they were adding context to a moment that we don't know. It's very confusing at the beginning of the game. Parallel timelines do spill into each other later on, but the only timelines that do that are the only 2 we are aware of, which is the one where Sparxxyy is dead or alive. These Polaroids appear to be from a whole other reality, just not one that Max is visiting. I know you can argue that there are millions of different timelines in this universe, but for the sake of this video, I won't dive down the loophole of time travel and the many possibilities. We'd be here for hours. But is it a bit of context, these Polaroids, and just why? Too much to ask? Next, Detective Vince Alderman. Deck 9 did his character an entire plot so dirty. We meet Alderman at the end of chapter 2 when he wants to search Moses' lab for evidence. We learn from Moses that he does in fact have Sparxxy's camera, as he wanted to keep it for sentimental reasons, having the last photo she took before her death on it, but if Alderman finds it, it doesn't particularly look good on Moses to have crime scene evidence. So Max sneaks in using her power to retrieve it to save Moses' back. Alderman is also present doing some investigating, and let's just say some weird shit happens which is beyond Alderman's comprehension. Once you retrieve the camera through the magic of timeline jumping, we end up back outside the office and Alderman invites Max in for a chat. Here, you can get a major choice to agree to help Alderman with the investigation by accepting his business card or refusing. But this choice doesn't matter anyway, because at the beginning of chapter 3, Alderman barges into Max's property, grilling her and demanding answers, implying she has an involvement with Sparxxy's death. His hostility also has Max afraid that he'll discover she has powers, which makes no sense because in previous Life is Strange games, other characters aren't really aware that powers even exist anyway. So why is this suddenly a concern? Plus, if Max agrees to play nice with Alderman at the end of chapter 2, why does he still confront her in the manner that he did? It seems again, no matter what choice you choose, it doesn't matter because the outcome is relatively the same and has no impact on the trajectory of the story anyway. This entire scene sets up another scene shortly after, which also makes no sense. At the Overlook later on, Alderman sees, I presume, a past version of himself at the Overlook, touches it, and just gets sucked into this time vortex paradox thing and poof, gone. Wiped from existence. After this entire ordeal, Moses investigates Alderman, but it turns out he never existed in the first place, and Max and Moses are the only ones that have an account of him. And this is never explained. Then the game swiftly moves on. It's almost like Deck 9 tries to brush this entire thing under the rug, but it makes zero sense. Just why? So, where is Max's counterpart? In both timelines Max can travel to, everything is the same, apart from Sparxxyy being alive in one, but not in the other. When Max first crosses over to the alive timeline in Chapter 2, Sparxxyy is waiting for Max to meet her in the North Quad, but she's waiting to meet Max from the alive reality. So where is she? It appears that Max is able to exist in this alternate universe without bumping into herself, and doesn't somehow for the entire game, and it's never explained. Later on in Chapter 3, when Max goes back to Hellerton, she makes a comment about how in this universe, it looks like she hadn't been home for days, but still no explanation. Looks like Deck 9 didn't have a clue either. I know this theme of Max hopping into another reality is touched on in the comics. However, later on, it's explained that Max likely died at the hand of Jefferson in this particular reality that is explored in the comics, which is why she doesn't run into her counterpart. So that begs the question, did Max die instead of Sparxxyy in the alive timeline? Well, no. Why would Sparxxyy be waiting for this version of Max in this timeline if she was dead? Plus, this theory gets erased when we learn Max is Sparxxyy's killer anyway. There are many more holes and inconsistencies within the plot that I haven't mentioned, and I might make a separate video detailing them more, but these are the ones that stood out to me most during my playthrough of the game. I feel like this is an appropriate segue into discussing the plot as a whole, and it's, well, As I said earlier on in the video, the story starts out good enough. There isn't much to go wrong with a murder mystery with a supernatural twist. At first, during marketing, I thought this type of story was a safe and smart move from Deck 9. Murder mystery stories have so many creative pathways in terms of who, when, where, how. There is literally so much to play with, so many ways for creative interpretation with that well-known Life is Strange twist that we all know. But along the way, the story got a bit lost and muddled. I may be relaying a lot of stuff I've already said so far, and me talking about the story may be a bit of a mess, because it is a mess, so do try and follow along and bear with me here. So, we learn about a student called Maya Okada, who was a good friend of Sparxxyy's who sadly took her own life before the events of Double Exposure. So Max now wants to learn more about her. Then we learn that Lucas Colomero, an author/member of faculty at Caledon, plagiarized Maya's work within his book he's promoting and getting a lot of praise for, and took credit for it, which is why she took her own life. I feel like Lucas is the antagonist of the game when Deck 9 says, same with Alderman. But where Alderman gets, I presume, killed off earlier on, and we get given next to no explanation for it, the game swiftly moves on. Not sure whether this bombshell revelation about plagiarism is a way to try and distract the player from what happened with Alderman, but it just made me more confused. These two weird subplots exist alongside each other in the story, and they don't really correlate to the main plot, which is Sparxxyy being mysteriously murdered by who we now know as Max. It just made my brain explode. If that wasn't confusing and overwhelming enough, shortly after, we learn that Sparxxyy is a literal shapeshifter. What the f- Okay, so when I was doing my first playthrough, it wasn't a total shock that Sparxxyy was a shapeshifter because unfortunately, I accidentally saw a leak about it on Twitter before the entire game even came out. But I was still confused, especially when going back to the question of who is Deck 9 trying to highlight as the antagonist here? Is it Alderman? Is it Lucas? Is it Sparxxyy? Oh god. Luckily, at the beginning of Chapter 4, after all is revealed about Sparxxyy being a shapeshifter, the introduction scene is just Max and Sparxxyy laying it all out on the table, both of them going into a lot of detail about their past. I'm quite grateful that Deck 9 fed us this information very soon after, because I sure had a lot of questions after we discovered that Sparxxyy has powers, so I'm glad we got to have those questions answered promptly. In this scene, we get to see Max be possibly her most vulnerable in the entire game, opening up about her current powers, her rewind power she had in high school, what happened in Arcadia Bay, and this is the amazing voice acting I mentioned earlier from Hannah Tell. Her performance in this very scene perfectly encapsulates the pain Max went through before and after the storm, describing the impact it had on her, describing how it made her feel, saving the blue-haired girl. Why? Yeah, that's the closest I got in the entire playthrough from shedding a tear, so thanks Hannah for nearly making me cry. Not only do we get information about Sparxxy's past and her powers, but also an explanation for the weird happenings previously, such as Gwen allegedly dealing weed to students when she said she hadn't, Lucas saying horrible things to his son when he said he didn't, Vin seemingly not remembering the passcode to his phone all of a sudden, Amanda acting kinda sus in the fine arts building after you have a conversation with Yasmin. It's explained that it was actually all Sparxxyy in those instances, she had just shapeshifted into them. So it finally made all those strange happenings make sense, which I appreciated, and I enjoyed this entire scene as a whole. It captures the raw emotion that we all know and love in the Life is Strange games. But the story takes another turn, and that is that Sparxxyy wants to get revenge and to avenge Maya for Lucas plagiarizing her work and wants to expose him at the upcoming Krampus party. Now, her wanting to do this makes perfect sense, but what about the murder mystery element? The main plot here is that Sparxxyy died in the alternate timeline at the hand of Max, and though it is briefly mentioned a few times in this scene and Sparxxyy just kinda says, we'll get back to this later, the whole murder mystery stuff just kinda goes out the window after that, and the game yet again takes a whole new direction. I'll admit though, I enjoyed the next few scenes thereafter at the Krampus party and getting to expose Lucas by working with Sparxxyy and a few other characters. Although I don't think he's an inherently bad person, it felt good to expose him because I knew he was a bit shady and had a few skeletons in his closet. The setup of the entire thing was fun, such as getting to see the vibe of the snapping turtle in the Alive timeline, where the Krampus party is happening, spirits are high, everyone's having a great time, for you to then cross over to the Dead timeline where no Krampus party is happening and the vibes are very melancholy. Plus, we get one of the most wholesome scenes with Moses building his gingerbread house, and the entire scene with giving him the chimney made my heart weep a little bit, and solidified to me that I will indeed protect Moses at all costs. And you should too. It was also entertaining watching Max and Sparxxyy interacting in this scene, getting to see them work together with their powers to pull this off. The two have great chemistry, and I find Sparxxy's character just so endearing and quirky. Despite all of this though, the entire exposing stuff felt kind of underwhelming to me. I don't know why. The scene just felt like it was missing something, and it didn't feel as groundbreaking as I'd hoped. The only thing I can think of to explain why I felt this way is that there was next to no build up to this subplot. It didn't help that it felt like there was a lot to unpack in this chapter anyway as a whole, and I felt really overwhelmed by everything. After successfully exposing Lucas and his schemes, the story, yet again, takes a final turn going into chapter 5, and it became a meme at how confusing the last couple hours of this game is. After exposing Lucas, he asks to speak to Sparxxyy privately. Max is initially concerned by this and tries to convince Sparxxyy not to go as she's afraid she'll get hurt, but lets her go anyway. Here, things get crazy. All of a sudden, everyone on campus is possessed, and Max knows it has to do with Sparxxyy. She goes searching for Sparxxyy to find her at the Outlook, pointing a gun at her mother. Here, it's revealed that Yasmin was secretly behind everything, covering up Lucas's plagiarism and its link to Maya's death, and also, she is responsible for Sparxxy's book deal getting cancelled. So Lucas must have told her this information after confrontation and exposure of his secret to hurt Sparxxyy. This causes Sparxxy's power to go haywire and she totally loses control, and in my opinion, this is one of the best scenes in the entire game. As great and powerful this entire scene is though, one thing that doesn't make sense to me is how absolutely everyone is possessed by Sparxxy's power. It's explained at some stage that Sparxxyy leaves a piece of herself in everyone she has ever shapeshifted as, but this entire theory falls apart because Sparxxyy surely hasn't shapeshifted into every single person on campus at some stage. Even Moses is possessed, and Sparxxyy admits earlier on in chapter 4 that she has never shapeshifted into Moses and he's off limits. So how has all of this occurred? There is also the threat of a storm again, which of course instantly concerns Max. It's assumed this storm is caused by Sparxxy's powers, but again, how? Her powers only affect how others perceive her. It made sense in the first Life is Strange game that Max's powers were the cause of the storm, as her continued use of her powers literally broke time and the fabric of reality. I doubt Sparxxy's power has that effect. It's never explained how her power getting out of control causes everyone and everything to be so affected by it, and it really bugged me for the rest of the game, and it set itself up for many more inconsistencies later on, which makes chapter 5 just that bit more confusing. Chapter 5 finds us in a bit of what I thought initially was a time vortex at first. However, after Max uses the photo of her aiming the gun at Sparxxyy to go back into that moment, they walk into the storm? Then after that, a good 90% of this chapter are nightmare sequences, and some of these scenes are a good nod to the first Life is Strange game. One of the first ones is Max being back in the Blackwell bathroom the day Chloe got shot. However, the events of the shooting are reenacted by Sparxxyy and Max. Max acting out Nathan's lines and Sparxxyy acting out Chloe's. We also get an excellent recreation of the moment the shooting happened. Max's reaction mirroring the same reaction from 10 years ago, and this moment gave me goosebumps thanks to the voice acting, the soundtrack, the sound effects used, the visuals. I appreciated the scene and the nods to those notorious events. A little while later, we find Max having a nightmare sequence, but this time about the dark room and what happened to her at the hand of Jefferson. This entire scene was truly haunting and even gave me a few flashbacks to when I first played Life is Strange and how disturbed I was by Jefferson and everything to do with the dark room. Though these specific scenes were brief and we moved on quite quickly, it was still enough to show the trauma these moments brought Max. I feel like these scenes are put in place as Max has to almost relive this trauma to try and move past it. Sometimes you have to face your demons head on and confront your past, rather than run away from it, which is a reoccurring theme in Double Exposure's story, as well as Max's character. Rather than dealing with these hardships head on, she flees and tries to outrun the problem, knowing that one day, these things will catch up to her and she'll have to deal with it. She can't run forever. The next scene that stood out to me was the scene of Max being at the motel rooms. I love the mentions of Chloe, even though some of them were heartbreaking, by interacting with the environment and listening to the dialogue of Max looking back on her time with Chloe when they were together and both on the road before they split up. These scenes in a specific sequence get very trippy, with Max getting tired as you progress. The message wasn't exactly clear, which encourages the player to dig deeper, but I think the message the writers were trying to convey in this scene is that Max is exhausted by her past. In between these scenes and segments, Max is still looking for Sparxxyy but is unable to find her, until you find certain characters who are seemingly possessed by her. These are Moses, Lucas, and Gwen. Max eventually figures out that the way to save them from this state is to take photos of them, but in double exposure mode on her Polaroid camera, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure Polaroid cameras don't have a double exposure mode unless she was using her powers, but that's another thing that was never really explained, so I tried not to think too much about it. Once you rescue each character under Sparxxyy's position, they're fully aware of what's just happened to them, though they aren't quite sure what's happening, they just know it has to do with Sparxxyy. It's confirmed later on that what is happening involving these characters isn't a dream, it's real life. The only explanation we're really given to this is that the two timelines have now merged together. Sparxxyy is possessing these characters because she's hurt by them, plus where she has shapeshifted into these characters previously, she has left a piece of herself in them, and the only way to erase this piece is to take the double exposed photos. But not everyone she has shapeshifted into that we're aware of throughout the story is affected by her like Moses, Lucas, and Gwen were. After saving the characters affected, Max and Sparxxyy reunite, and then a series of scenes follow with them having a conversation about everything in scenes we have sort of seen before. There isn't much context as to why this is happening. Annoyingly, it's another one of those unexplained moments where you just kinda have to go with it. Sparxxyy has also left a piece of herself in Max, but again, I find it weird that Max rescues herself by taking a double exposed selfie, but she wasn't negatively affected by Sparxxyy like the others were, unless that explained everything we just went through. After this, it brings us back to where we were at the Overlook. There is suddenly no more storm, Yasmin is injured after being shot by Sparxxyy, and Sparxxyy has this huge speech with Max, convincing them that they can basically be gods because of their powers. However, now Sparxxyy knows everyone is very aware of what she's done, and she wants to find other people with powers, she has to leave for a while, but she'll come back for Max. Which leads us to the final choice, to accept Sparxxyy's offer of basically leaving with Sparxxyy after her return to try and, I guess, take control of everything with their powers, or to refuse. At first, I had no idea what I was getting myself into at this stage, or what I was accepting or refusing, but it seems no matter what choice you go with at the end, it doesn't matter, because Sparxxyy still leaves anyway. After this absolute mindfuck series of events, we get to see Max again a few days after the events of what feels like meaningless final choice. But I actually liked this scene at the North Quad. Max is reflecting on what just happened, stating she isn't scared anymore and she's ready to stop running from her past demons, knowing it does no justice for her, to accept how things were and to move forward in life. She has this brand new outlook. This is essentially the first time we've seen Max like this before, and I loved it. It felt like an appropriate character arc considering everything she's been through. She deserves that happy ending, but sadly, that's still quite a while off. Everyone now knows that she has powers, and it's her duty to explain to everyone what the hell just happened. The storm happened, everyone has memories of what happened and is traumatized, some complaining of brain fog and headaches when you mooch around the campus. The NPCs are confused, Max is confused, the player is confused, and apparently so are the writing team in Deck 9, because even right at the end, the player gets next to no explanation of what the fuck just happened. So yeah, in terms of the main plot, it got a bit messy at the end, and I'm definitely not alone by being really confused by it. I think it started off well, but the further the story got, we had lots of unexplained events happen that just created so many unanswered questions and holes in the story. I know the point sometimes is that you need to dig a little deeper in narrative games, but we've tried, and any theories we seem to come up with just fall through because another inconsistency rules it out. I just think the main plot fell really flat and just didn't deliver for me, which again, I think is a shame because I do think it had promise at first, but we were left disappointed. It's pretty obvious due to the Marvel-style end scene after the credits that we are getting a sequel to this game. I've seen a lot of fans defend the plot by saying it sets up everything for a Double Exposure 2, but I think that's a weak argument because we still paid full price for this game. We wanted it to deliver, but it just didn't plot-wise. Whether this game is a full advertisement to the next or not, I was still left feeling almost empty at the end of this game. I think all of the Life is Strange games have great endings that are supposed to make you feel something based on the final choice. For example, in Life is Strange 1, the ending plays out based on whether you saved Bay or Bay, and regardless of what you chose, both scenes play out in their own heartbreaking way and reflect based on your final choice. In Before the Storm, though both endings are similar due to the game being a prequel, even little choices you make throughout the game affect the final cutscene and what you might see in that. It's still powerful. Life is Strange 2 has multiple endings, and the second entry does an amazing job at showing you that there were consequences to your actions, big or small. Even True Colors, in my opinion, an overhated title in the series, follows suit with its ending. The ending plays out in many different ways based on the major choices you make throughout your playthrough, as well as one big final choice which just neatly ties up the plot. But Double Exposure didn't give me any feeling at all in the end, whether that be feeling sad, happy, or absolutely devastated. It's easy to relay back to the point of, well, that's because there's going to be a sequel, but even the cliffhanger didn't feel powerful enough for me. The moment the game ended, my exact thought was, is that it? Because I just felt like there was still so much more that could have been done with this game. It was just really anticlimactic and underwhelming. Now I have finally gotten the topic of the plot out of the way, I want to discuss some additional points and thoughts that I have. I want to address something that I've been dying to address, and I'm sure you've been waiting for me to address, and that's the whole situation with Chloe Price. Now, I do want to make an entirely separate video on this matter anyway, as there's a lot to unpack. But let's cut to the chase on what I'm going to say about it now. I am disappointed that Deck 9 made the narrative decision to break up Max and Chloe's relationship, but not at all surprised. In my first impressions video, I expressed that disappointment very loudly, and I definitely think I was being a tad overdramatic about it, but it still hurts. The fact they broke up feels like a punch in the gut. Even worse, that this is mostly explained through subtext and off-screen. Max sacrificed an entire town for this girl, but that's probably where the issues began. Realistically, it's unlikely any relationship, especially romantic, can survive that level of trauma. Whether you think the idea of realism belongs in this game or not, it does make sense. Max was stuck in the past over what happened in Arcadia Bay, and Chloe wanted to move on, and that's respectable. I think it's on brand for Chloe to understand this, and that neither of them would be able to fully heal from this extremely traumatic situation while still together. This is just one thing they can't do together, which is why the relationship failed, and this is detailed in the letter Chloe wrote Max. I think what made Max and Chloe's relationship so relatable in the first place was that it wasn't perfect, and I feel like the themes of the games are about imperfect relationships as a whole. The impression I get from this entire Max and Chloe breakup situation is that Chloe loved Max enough to let her go. This doesn't mean it's over forever, and there's even a hint of reconciliation right at the end of the game, but that's pretty much it. I think the breakup fits the themes that Double Exposure attempts to paint throughout the game, that being heartbreak, betrayal, loneliness, and trying to escape your past. To put myself in the writer's shoes for a second, all of this would have been eliminated if Max was just able to call her girlfriend. The plot wouldn't have worked. Not that I think it worked amazingly anyway, but Max needed to be alone for this story. So I get it. Although on the other hand, I get why fans are still so mad about it. This is a relationship that means a lot to a lot of people, and it does feel shitty to know that Deck 9 broke these two up off screen, and a relationship, or now lack thereof, just became a tiny subplot. This is another example of a missed opportunity because I feel like there was just so much missed potential for them to just show more about Max and Chloe's relationship between the first game and Double Exposure. They were already halfway there with Rihanna DeVries re-recording more Chloe lines when Max is remembering. If it wasn't a budget issue, a little scene of Chloe wouldn't have hurt, even if it was in the longed out nightmare sequence in chapter 5 somewhere. I think that chapter was a missed opportunity to have Chloe appear in a nightmare, considering Max's trauma is linked to this person, but unfortunately, we got none of that. There is so much about what we now know about Max and Chloe and their relationship that has been left open, and I think that is entirely deliberate. I mean, imagine in the next game that there is a Max and Chloe reunion. They're both healed from their past and ready to move forward together. That'd be genius. But maybe I'm just digging at crumbs. I still have hope for Pricefield and their story, and it definitely isn't over yet. The next point I want to quickly go over is the choices throughout Double Exposure. Life is Strange is renowned for the difficult choices you have to make throughout the games and the impact those said choices have on the direction of the story or certain parts of the narrative. Usually, the game can go in multiple directions based on what the player chooses, whether it be big or small. I feel like in Double Exposure, the choices don't really feel as meaningful as I think they're supposed to be. Sure, throughout the game, Max has to make quite a few difficult decisions, but it seems no matter what choice you go with, the game ends the exact same. This is a shame because it makes everybody's own playthrough of the game feel very samey. After playing a new Life is Strange title, I like reading up on the choices I didn't make and how that changed my own story. Each choice is supposed to write the story slightly differently, but Double Exposure just doesn't have this payoff, and though some choices change how other characters perceive Max, you don't really feel or witness many repercussions throughout the story. It doesn't offer much replay value, which is really disappointing, as I and many others like replaying the older titles and choosing choices you didn't go with last time. It's fun to see the story unfold differently. Each time I've replayed a Life is Strange game, I've discovered something new or a cutscene I hadn't seen before because of choices I had made. It made going back really rewarding, but Double Exposure doesn't really have this effect with its choices. It feels like they just don't matter. They do not have consequences, and it doesn't matter because the narrative at the end is still the same for everyone, regardless of your choices. Next, the side characters. I know I said I liked them in my first impressions video, but throughout the last 3 chapters, they didn't make enough of an impact for me and they were less memorable. I mean, they aren't bad characters per se, I actually enjoyed them a lot, but there was just something missing about them and their involvement in the plot. Some characters stood out to me more than others, such as Moses. Absolutely loved him throughout the entire game, and I was ready to take drastic measures if anything bad happened to him. He was the sweetest and purest soul. I just wanted to protect him at any and all costs. I still really enjoyed Suffy as a character too, despite her sudden and weird character arc at the end. I just found her absolutely hilarious at times, and the delivery of a lot of her dialogue was just so entertaining. Gwen was also great. She's rough around the edges with her past, but I loved her. I wish she got a bit more screen time because to me, she was another character that just had so much more potential. I feel the same way about Diamond too. According to the post-credits scene, it's hinted that she might have powers or something is happening with her, but she didn't get a whole lot of screen time either. I guess her character will have a lot more of a role in the sequel, but I just felt like her being the character hinted to having powers at the end was just a bit random. A character that got a fair bit of hate but I liked was actually Loretta. She strikes a huge resemblance to Rachel Amber, and even her personality reminds me of Rachel too. She's dedicated, intuitive, and really tries to dig deep. Loretta is branded as annoying and overly nosy, and yeah, sometimes, but as long as you're not rude to her, she's not rude to you, and that's fair enough. I got on her good side during my playthrough, so it made her more likeable that way. Believe it or not, I liked Vin as well. Though at first I was really confused by what Deck 9 was trying to achieve with his character. It's obvious he was a romantic option, but he was also very much tied up with Sparxxyy, Abraxas, and the whole situation with the story, and he was painted in a suspicious light a lot of the time, almost like he was going to be an antagonist, but I still enjoyed his character. Yes, he says some weird shit and makes a lot of foot jokes, but his heart is still in the correct place in my opinion, despite some bits of dialogue wanting me to have a restraining order against him. You learn later on though that he was under a lot of pressure, hence why he was acting kinda sus sometimes. I still don't think he was a suitable romance option though, and a lot of the flirting you can engage in seems very unnatural and forced. Speaking of romance options, we have Amanda too, and I said in my first impressions video that I really liked her, and I still feel the same. She is a genuine sweetheart, and her and Max's relationship throughout the game is really wholesome, whether you romance her or not. You do get the option to romance her within the first 20 or so minutes of the game, and the romance doesn't come to a head until chapter 3, but I really enjoyed Amanda and Max. It's very obvious that Amanda has a crush on Max throughout the game, and it's actually kind of sweet. Even if you choose not to romance, Amanda's feelings for Max aren't eliminated or disregarded. She just kind of admires Max from afar, but respects her decision and boundaries. And the same with Vin. The scene where you go on the fake date with Amanda in chapter 3 was really imaginative and well written, plus the kiss between them just seemed a lot more organic and magical than the kiss between Vin and Max. Max was drunk for the kiss with Vin, and I think that speaks volumes in itself. As great as the entire romance was with Amanda, it still feels like that's all her character was really there for. Just a cute girl who works at the bar. She doesn't really have a lot of screen time outside of the snapping turtle, and her character doesn't really add much to the story plot-wise. She's just sort of there. At least with Vin, he has quite a lot of involvement in the plot, and he even tips Max off about Lucas and his plagiarism. I just wish that Amanda was involved a bit more and her character had more meaning other than just someone you could potentially kiss later on. My only problem with the romance in this game in particular is that both of them feel kind of pointless anyway, which takes me back to the point of some choices having next to no impact, because nothing comes of either romance at the end, unlike the other games. I know I said that the Amanda romance was nice, and it was. I liked it, up until chapter 5. Due to the timelines merging, Amanda has memories of Max making a move on her in the Alive timeline, because in the Dead timeline, she softly rejects Max due to everything happening with Sparxxyy. She has memories of both of those events. She admits that it's a bit fucked up, and it is. You can actually romance both Amanda and Vin, which is even more fucked up. I didn't like that. I always liked that it's either one or the other approach. Not that there's anything wrong with polyamorous relationships under the condition everything is consensual, but if you ask Amanda on a date and then romance Vin and kiss him, you do that at the bar, in front of Amanda, in the Dead timeline, which is the timeline where Max asks her out, and later on, Amanda mentions this. It just gets all that more confusing with the timelines merging. One final point I want to make about romance in this game is that the Life is Strange games get a lot of flack for their romance options, and that they're even branded as dating simulators, especially Double Exposure. But I disagree with this. If you've played any Life is Strange game, you'll know that romance and sexuality is a theme that is usually explored, and you'll get 2 romance options in each game, Before the Storm, of course, being the exception, where Rachel is the only option. There are instances where you can flirt with said interests and engage in those conversations, but you don't have to reciprocate any of that. It's purely down to you. Romance is definitely always implied throughout the game, but it is never forced upon you if you don't want to. It's an undertone and a subtle theme, but not a main one. I do want to touch upon the versions of Double Exposure that were advertised during marketing. There were 3 versions to pick from. We have the Standard Edition, which was just the base game. There is a deluxe version, which comes with a few additional outfit packs for Max to wear. Then the controversial Ultimate Edition, with a hefty $74.99 price tag. It included all the exclusive outfit packs for Max, 2 weeks early access to chapters 1 and 2, and additional cat content. Now, the cat content was wholesome. I am a cat person and cat mum myself, so I was really looking forward to this content. But was it worth the additional money? No. You literally get about 3 scenes worth of cat content spread throughout the game, then you give the cat back at the end because Max learns it isn't a stray, but a lost cat. I thought it was cool you got to pick the breed and the name of the cat, Plus, all the names are based on Max's voice actress, Hannah Tell's actual cats in real life, which was really cute. Her cat Miso actually came to a recording session with her and provided meows and purrs for the cat you choose in the game, which is super wholesome and a nice touch. I liked the cat content for what it was, but it just wasn't worth the additional money you pay. It felt more like a gimmick than anything else, which was a shame. To sum up, Double Exposure was a mix of emotions for me. Not in the way I'm used to after finishing a Life is Strange game anyway. Double Exposure didn't have much of a lasting impact on me, unlike the other games have. There was just something missing, and it leaves a lot to be desired. It's a shame because I really wanted to love this game, but I got left feeling disappointed by the end of it. I even did a second playthrough to get the footage needed for this review and tried to keep a more open-minded approach and took down some different notes, but even then, I still finished the game with the same hollow feeling as before. This explains why it's taken me so long to make this video. Where it's mostly negative, it's been hard to criticize something that I love so dearly. On my channel, I enjoy talking about the games I love. One of those obviously being Life is Strange. Not only is it out of my comfort zone to be critical and negative about a series I love, but I simply hate shitting on other people's work. I know firsthand, having studied game design for a short time, that it's not easy to make a video game. It takes a lot of work. I don't want to say that Double Exposure is a bad game. It has its merits, and there were a few moments in the game that I really enjoyed. Some of the new features were fun, and I certainly didn't have a bad time playing it per se, but I don't think I can say it's an overly good game either. It's just okay. I do think the narrative and writing team were really brave to take a leap when it came to Max's story after the storm, but it's hard to ignore how they handled Chloe and the entire breakup, which is a focal relationship in the entire series, how they told Suffy's story and her weird character arc, how there were so many subplots just coexisting that had little relevance to the main murder mystery plotline. I liked the idea of Deck 9 being bold about their decisions, but it just wasn't executed very well. Going back to the point I made right at the beginning of this video, the bad just simply outweighs the good for me in this instance. I don't necessarily hate Deck 9 for the narrative decisions they took Double Exposure in though. I think this was a developer that wanted to slightly differentiate themselves from Don't Nod, the original developers, and that's fine. They just didn't go about it amazingly. I may have, as a fan, lost some trust in Deck 9, but I don't and won't send any malice towards them as a studio. Even though Double Exposure didn't live up to my own expectations, I'm still grateful that we got another Life is Strange title. Sure, it's not really the title anyone asked for, but thanks to this game, I and many other fans have reconnected with the Life is Strange community. It's had its ups and downs over the last few months due to differing opinions, but I certainly am very grateful for all the friends and mutuals I made along the way with the announcement of this game, reigniting my passion for the series, my passion for content creation again, and getting to feel that sense of community, whether it be on places like Twitter or TikTok, or when I've gone to conventions or Square Enix arranged events. I've met so many amazing people, and that wouldn't have been possible without this game. So that has certainly been a fun and good experience. Whether you enjoyed Double Exposure or not, your opinion is entirely valid and you're 100% entitled to it. Again, I want to apologise that it took so long for this review to come out. This is easily the biggest project I've ever taken on my YouTube channel, so if you've sat all the way through, I really appreciate it. I plan on making so many more Life is Strange videos in the near future, so do consider subscribing so you don't miss out on those. I also plan on covering other games I'm into as well, so stay tuned and watch this space. I tend to not advertise my social media as much, but don't forget to follow me on those. I'm very active on both Twitter and Instagram at the moment. I tend to post a lot of behind the scenes of my videos and what's coming next and when, so consider staying in the loop. Thank you so much for watching this video of me yapping, and I hope I'll catch you all in the next one. Goodbye and take care.